Welcome to the show. This is Jason Hartman, your host, and every 10th episode we do something kind of special, kind of different. What we do is we go off topic. So regardless of which show it is on the Hartman Media Network, whether it be one of the financial shows, economics, real estate investing, travel, longevity, all of the other topics that we have, every 10th episode we go off topic and we explore something of general interest, something of general life success value. And so many of our listeners around the world in 164 countries have absolutely loved our 10th episode shows. So that's what we're going to do today. And let's go ahead and get to our guest with a special 10th episode show. And of course, on the next episode, we'll be back to our regular programming. Here we go.
This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Thank you, Jason. I would not have as much money today if it wasn't for you. Sissy and I both made a ton of money, and, thanks to you and your guidance and your show and everything. It's been great, and now cash flow for all your clients on top of it. Not only appreciation, but cash flow. You made a lot of people rich, my friend. You're a good man. Thank you, Jason.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 2020. And you know what that means? Today is a 10th episode show. But we are going to be talking about something that could be the most devastating thing ever to the real estate market and to the economy. And you need to be aware of this because it is absolutely the biggest thing. It's not interest rates. It's not the typical stuff that everybody's talking about. This is much more significant than anything you're hearing about in terms of what it means for the economy and the real estate market. So let's go ahead and dive into that. But before we do, I just want to say happy Financial Independence Day to everybody, all of our US listeners. We have actually named, there are these, naming calendars, right? July as Financial Independence Month. So hopefully, as you have listened to this show over the years, you've been maybe hearing me for as much as 18 years now. And we always talk about financial independence and specifically your Financial Independence Day, because it is coming soon if it has not already arrived, if you are following our plan. So that's what is really important. Okay, so we're not going to talk on a 10th show about packaged commodities investing. We're not going to talk about refi till you die. We're not going to talk about the 10 commandments of successful investing or how you can't hear the dogs that don't bark. Well, actually, maybe we will talk about that a little bit because this episode hovers on that idea quite a bit. But we'll not talk about the ultimate investing equation or inflation-induced debt destruction or shorting the dollar or regression to replacement cost or linear, cyclical, and hybrid markets. But we will talk about the peak of civilization. And as you've heard me say, I believe that the peak of civilization was 1990. I don't mean that from a technological perspective. Obviously, technology has evolved incredibly since then. All kinds of amazing things going on. As I always say, it's an amazing time to be alive, but not in every aspect of life. And the one specific aspect where it is definitely not an amazing time to be alive, in my opinion, is the culture war, which has been lost. And it is so potentially devastating to life, to literally to human life, to the human race. So we'll dive into that a little bit today. We've got a guest, Wheat Waffles, here with us to ferret out some of the statistics on this stuff. All right, so let me know if you agree or disagree with me on the peak of civilization. Was it 1990? Was the 1980s the last good decade in terms of, well, the economy was never sensible, at least not since 1971. But in terms of culture, right? So examine that in your own head. Comment below if you're on YouTube. If not, please go to jasonhartman.com/ask if you're listening on the podcast and comment. Let me know what you think. And by the way, I want to thank so many of you. I haven't even had time to get to all of your stuff, but so many of you submitted just fantastic insights on artificial intelligence and its impact on our future, which is a very big deal. In fact, I'm going to show you a quote from a very big deal person here in a minute that relates to that exactly. But I want to say thank you for going to jasonhartman.com/ask and providing me with articles, research, your opinions on AI and the impact of AI. Please do the same on this important issue that we're discussing today. jasonhartman.com/ask. Or on YouTube, just comment below, or any other video platform you're watching on, comment below. So, you've heard that quote from one of the Rothschild family, the founders of the central banking system, that old European family, right? And it's give me control of the nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws. Then you heard the corollary to that quote, which comes from none other than yours truly, Jason Hartman, who said, I do not care who controls the laws or the money, but whoever controls the music controls the world, because the music is so impactful. So many cultural revolutions have centered around music, especially in the last century. Think of Elvis and the Beatles, and think of jazz music, and just amazing cultural changes due to music, an incredibly powerful thing. So Elon Musk, that's the person I was talking about a moment ago, he said population collapse is the second biggest danger to civilization after artificial intelligence, in my humble opinion. And you know what? He's right. This is the most important topic we're going to talk about today. And, this great Churchill quote is really awesome. That the truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it. Ignorance may deride it. But in the end, there it is. It's the truth. And a lot of this topic is not politically correct. People don't want to hear it. They argue with it. They say it's misogynistic. They say it's not politically correct. They say it's just unfair to pick on these ideas. But they are literally leading to the end of the world, to such giant impacts on our culture, on the economy, on the real estate market. So that's what we're going to talk about today, a very important topic. We have a population nightmare coming our direction. It is absolutely shocking. If you're seeing this on video, look at these fertility maps. This is 1970. And these are the world fertility rates, right? In the United States and Europe and Russia, fertility was 2 to 3 children per woman. Now it has just fallen off a cliff. You're going to see that in a moment. And then the fertility rates in Africa and, of course, Latin America and Asia were much higher than that. So it's always been lower in the Western countries and some of the Eastern countries too. But look at today. This is truly shocking. Okay, remember, replacement rate is 2.1 children per woman, 2.1. Okay. And if you compare 2016 fertility rate, by the way, that's not today, that's 2016. This is as far as the map goes. To 1970, it is truly shocking what is happening to the world. We literally are running out of people. Okay, now, in terms of the real estate market, you've heard me talk about this a lot over the years. This is not something you need to worry about now or for quite a while, but come late 2040s, this is going to be a big, big deal. It's going to be a Japan-style real estate market where in Tokyo, you can literally get a free house They're giving away houses for free. Detroit, you can buy a house for $1, right? These are areas where the population has declined. Detroit has lost about half of its population. You see the same thing. I saw an article the other day that San Francisco is the new Detroit. I don't know if it's quite that bad, but it's pretty bad in San Francisco. When the population declines, that is unfixable. It is the one thing you just cannot fix. It is a hard, cold fact. And in terms of what it means to the real estate market and the broader economy, it is shockingly bad, shockingly bad. As I always say, you can't have a country if you don't have children. You can't have a country if you have children. And women are the gateway to the future because they decide whether there's going to be children or not. And if you mess with their minds, there is no future. Because they're the deciders, they're the choosers, right? They always say men are the chasers, women are the choosers, okay? And that's exactly what we have. Think of the old days. Think of that old show that used to be on TV. I used to watch the reruns when I was a kid, Happy Days, right? Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, these old shows. And just think about how incredibly different the culture was back then and how in the 1950s, talked about this before too. Can you imagine governments and corporations thinking, as the economy is slowing into the late 50s and, that baby boom stimulation that we had from the economy is now kind of waning. And we saw that, that relatively significant recession in the late 60s. And then definitely the 70s was a trying time. So all of these, in this like 20-year span, if you're in government or you're in corporations, you're thinking, what do we do in government, first of all, to stimulate the economy, to grow the GDP, to grow the tax base, to get more tax revenue in terms of the government? Well, we've got half of the population that is not working. They're not producing any income tax. They're not consuming enough, right? Because they're at home raising children. So if we want to go for instant gratification, we got to get them into the workforce. So let's create all sorts of dissatisfaction in their minds, in the minds of these women. Let's have the second wave of the feminist movement. Let's promote that idea, right? So all of these women will go into the workforce. And, it's fine if women want to work and be in the workforce. I'm all for that. Listen, I'm a libertarian. I believe in free choice. I believe people should be able to do what they want to do as long as they're not hurting anybody else. But when it becomes an agenda, that is quite a different discussion. If you look at what's going on with like this sort of, most people say when there's a sexual revolution, they talk about the pill and birth control, right? And the feminist movement. But, we're in a whole new sexual revolution now, right? And I won't even mention the names of it for fear of being canceled. But this new sexual revolution, it's fine with me if people want to make choices. They should be free to do what they want. But this is not about personal choice. This is about an agenda to, again, lower the birth rates, just like the birth control pill did, just like the feminist movement did, massive reduction in birth rates. And remember, there is a huge group of people in the world who believe humans are the scourge of the earth, that humans need to be reduced, that we need massive population control. And they're winning, okay? They are winning gloriously over those people who believe people are a resource. Yes, people do cost the earth. I get it. They make a mess. People litter, they make a mess. They don't clean up after themselves quickly enough, but eventually they do clean up after themselves and they create solutions. I talked on a prior episode about a new technology that basically eliminates plastic, right? I was in Europe for 5 weeks and they're now giving you, I don't know if this is a thing now in the US, but I noticed it in Europe, wooden utensils, wooden spoons, wooden forks, wooden knives. I mean, I never saw that before. So everybody's in fear of plastic, and some of it rightfully so, right? But there are technologies, people solve these problems, and without people, you're not going to have anybody to solve those problems. You need that brain power. Think of East Berlin, right? And think of why everybody was leaving East Berlin when it was under communism, right? Before they built the Berlin Wall. They had a brain drain. People were leaving because it was an anti-people climate. And so that brain drain was costing them so much money because the communists wanted the people to stay. They needed their brain power, right? And they were all leaving for the West. So over basically one weekend, they put up a wall, the Berlin Wall. Okay. And I remember my first time going to visit the Berlin Wall to Checkpoint Charlie. I spent 6 hours there, literally reading all these exhibits and looking at everything, and tears were coming from my eyes. I just couldn't believe that there would be such a fucked up government that everybody would want to just leave it. And they wouldn't incentivize people to stay. They would force them to stay. So if that was a brain drain and that was a problem for the communists, imagine that problem on a global scale, a brain drain. When you eliminate people, right? When people don't have children, that's essentially a brain drain. It's the same exact thing. And we need these brains of all these people that are yet to be born to solve the world's problems. Without them, what are we going to do? Right? I mean, you probably heard of the Georgia Guidestones. There's a lot of conspiracy theories around the Georgia Guidestones. And in fact, one, a year ago or 2 years ago or something, it was blown up. They blew up one of the Georgia Guidestones. But on these Georgia Guidestones, the message supposedly from the elites, I don't know about the conspiracy theories. I'm not really commenting on that, although a lot of these conspiracy theories are very much coming true, of course. But it says that the world population should be 500 million people. That means right now, according to them, we are 7.5 billion people overpopulated. Wow, that's pretty scary. If they want to reduce the population by 7.5 billion people, what are they going to do? They going to create a pandemic? Or medicine for that pandemic? Maybe, that'll be the thing. Are they going to create all sorts of movements in our culture that are going to lower the birth rate? Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. Okay, so the governments needed more people. They needed more tax revenue. They needed more people in the workforce. But then the corporations needed more consumption because their business was slowing after that baby boom, right? And so they thought, well, what if we could create a lot of discontent in the culture and we could get women to be unhappy, right? Where they were formerly, relatively, I'm not saying all of them were happy. Of course, all of people aren't ever happy, right? Some were unhappy, some were in abusive relationships, some had terrible husbands, but some were very happy, right? And, but what they did is they created all of this discontent, right? And all of the media and the movies, and it started really in the 60s, and then the 70s, it took off with a vengeance, created this discontent. And these corporations wanted to double their market share. And they thought if we could get people to either stay single or get divorced, we would be able to sell 2 coffee makers, 2 toasters, 2 beds, 2 sofas, instead of just one. Because when people are coupled up, they share things. But when they're not coupled up, when they're single and they need multiple households, then you're doubling your market share. And not to mention the pharmaceutical companies and the market share they've benefited from this movement, right? So there's this great book I've recommended before. It's the epic battle in the media and the culture between Paul Ehrlich and Julian Simon, and it's called The Bet. You must read this book, and you see who won the bet, right? One was saying we need population control. People are having too much sex and too many babies, right? And so we need to control the population. And then another one said, basically, people are a resource, right? People will solve these problems. I mean, look, why wasn't Malthus and the Malthusian economics school right over 200 years ago? Right? They thought the world was running out of resources back then when there were hardly any people on the earth compared to today. And that was completely wrong. We've created more prosperity, more abundance, more resources, solved more problems since then. It's an absolute miracle of human brain power. And if you listen to the anti-people movement, all of these problems wouldn't have been solved. The people wouldn't have been born to solve them. The brains would have never been here to solve these problems. So, really interesting book you must read. US marriage rates plummeting. I mean, marriage rates are just plummeting. It's absolutely shocking. Like, nobody's getting married anymore, okay? If you were in the wedding business, that would be a very bad business to be in right now. Check out this little short clip from a guy who's been in the news a lot lately.
Corporate America wants you childless, and this is a big change. 100 years ago, big companies built housing for the families of their employees and then schools and libraries to educate them. It was the humane thing to do, but it also seemed to make good business sense at the time. If you wanted workers you could count on, you had to take care of them and their offspring. But over time, that arrangement got expensive. Employees with families demanded higher wages to support their children, and in many cases, they formed unions to get those raises. So labor costs soared.
So what we saw happen there is we saw this anti-family movement in corporate America. And what did the big tech companies say? They said, we'll freeze your eggs, concentrate on your career. And I cannot believe the number of women I have spoken with. In fact, I spoke with one at Yacht Week just a few weeks ago in Europe. We were at a big party. This woman was a very intelligent 35-year-old dentist, Asian gal from Los Angeles, and I didn't even know her. But we just were standing next to each other. We each had a drink in our hand. And, you know, it was toward the end of the night. It was this giant party we were at. People were dancing. It was crazy. The music was blaring. And she just started talking to me about this. And she said, you know, I'm 35 years old. I think I really took the wrong path in life. All I really want to do is have children and be a mom. And yeah, you know, I've shown the world that I'm smart, that I can achieve things, that I can have my own dental practice. And now, you know, I said to her, you know, well, why don't you change your path then? And she said, well, now I'm just so committed because I've got all of these loans, student loans, loans for all the equipment in my dental office. And I've got to stay with it and I've got to do it. I've got all these obligations now. You know, she just really wanted to have a family. But she basically told me that she had been fooled by the system. She had been totally conned by the agenda. And this is so pervasive in our world. It is absolutely shocking. You know, the corporations, they don't want you to have kids. They want you to freeze your eggs. They want you to focus on your career so you could be independent and powerful. And, you know, you could show those evil men and the patriarchy. I mean, this is like, it's insane. The whole thing that has worked forever until 1960s, right? The whole system has been completely turned on its head, right? And again, I want to stress the point. I am all for freedom of choice. You know, look, I grew up with a single working mom, all right? I get it. You know, she was hitting her head against the glass ceiling when I was a kid, right? I'm totally into equality and free choice, and people should be able to do what they want. But there's a big difference between that and an agenda. There's a giant difference, and you got to understand the difference between those and fight the agenda. Have you seen this show? It's a Netflix show that's very popular. It's called Sex/Life. This show is absolutely disgusting and pathetic. Okay, it's basically about a woman who married essentially the perfect man, right? And he, you know, he's a very successful guy, investment banker, and she couldn't get over her bad boy ex-boyfriend. And so she cheats on her perfect man husband that she has children with because she has to have the constant novelty of the chase, of the bad boy, right? And I don't even want to say watch it because I don't want you to give it any ratings, but maybe go on YouTube, watch a couple clips about this show. It's absolutely appalling that this is mainstream culture. You know, it's total brainwashing. So look, let's get to our guest because this intro portion is going awfully long, and let's talk about the collapse of the economy and the collapse of the population. Because without people, you can't have an economy. Without people, you can't have a country. Without people, you can't have a real estate market. So again, the timeline for this, as it stands now, and of course it's subject to change, the timeline for this is about 25 years away. Okay? So late 2040s is when you have to worry about this. For now, status quo, there's a massive shortage of housing. Keep buying properties. It's all good. But this is coming, and it will be here before you know it. I mean, look, if you're 40 years old or older than that, you realize how 20, 25 years passes like the blink of an eye. I mean, it just goes by so quickly. And before you know it, we will be at this point. I want to get you to think about this in advance. And I want to encourage people to have children, including myself. So, got anyone to fix me up with? Go right ahead. Submit those at jasonhartman.com/ask. All right. Hey, maybe this could be a matchmaking show. We'll see. All right, let's get to our guest today, and let's take a dive into this. This is a young kid that has a big YouTube following that I interviewed on the show. He's got a channel called Wheat Waffles, which really has some very statistical insights into the culture war and the data, and he blends those two together very, very well. So let's go ahead and listen into that interview. Here we go. You've heard me say it often. If you want to have a country, you must have children. And we know about the demographic cliff, the demographic collapse in Western Europe, China, Japan, Russia, and it is coming to the US as well, but we are a little bit further away. In the US, we've probably got about a good 20 years before we really start noticing this. So it's an important issue. And I found a YouTube channel that illustrates this very well. And I wanted to bring on a guest today to talk about the importance of this. And he goes by Wheat Waffles. That's the name of the channel. And welcome, Wheat. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. It's a pleasure to have me on. I'm interested to speak more about this topic.
Yeah, it's good to have you. You did a fantastic video talking about why the population is at risk. There's sort of two schools of thought on this really ever since the 60s. One is that people are, well, really ever since Thomas Malthus a couple hundred years ago, is that people are a strain on the environment. People are a cost to the world. But there's another school of thought that says, hey, people are a resource. People solve problems and fix things and come up with miraculous cures for diseases and make life better. So that debate notwithstanding, I just wanted to take a deeper dive in, and I appreciate you bringing your slides on. And for those who are just listening on audio only, we'll of course explain what we're talking about. But tell us what's happening with the birth rate and the replacement rate, and why is it happening, more importantly?
Well, things are not looking good, to say the least. The birth rates, for those that can see them on the screen right now, it shows in 7 of 6 of the biggest economies and countries in the developed world, what their birth rates are. And just to touch on the point that you mentioned a second ago, I think the alarmist media has always had the agenda that the population is too large. Like overpopulation means that the environment is going to get destroyed and we're not going to have enough food to feed. They predict it's going to be at eventually 11 billion mouths to feed over the course of the next 50 to 100 years. And people will see that as a problem. However, recently, it kind of seems that it's actually going to be the opposite, that the population will peak at some point. I think the experts are saying it will be somewhere between 10 and 12 billion, depending on how things fare in the next 50 years. But then after that, the population will actually decline. And in some of the countries that are further ahead than us, you already mentioned a couple like Japan, China, South Korea, they're already seeing their populations decline. I think China saw their first fall in population. Is that correct?
Yes, they did. And it's so interesting to me when I hear these people think China's going to take over the world. And I get how you would have thought that 15 years ago. But as the old saying goes, demographics are destiny. You can't fix this any other way than the good old fashioned way of just people mating and having children.
One caveat to that.
There's a 25-year lag on it, before those people become productive. So you've got to have the kids now if you want to have the benefit of their production and contribution to the economy in a quarter century.
I would absolutely agree with that to the most part, but I do think that there's one caveat, and this is kind of why the West, has a ace up their sleeve of why they might not face the same problems as China, Japan, and South Korea, because these are incredibly xenophobic countries,
Right.
like with some of the tightest immigration policies in the world. It's almost impossible to move to a place like that. Whereas in the West, we have some of the most relaxed immigration policies in the
Right.
world. And I haven't checked the exact figures on it, but I think they said that countries like America and Britain, because of their immigration policy, they're not going to see a fall in their population for at least the next 50 years.
Right.
So although their native population might decline, it's kind of being supplemented by all of the immigrants coming over. And the government is also anticipating that that's supposed to prop up the economy.
No, that is definitely true. And one of the arguments as to why, for example, in the US, they don't control the southern border with Mexico is because they want to import the deflationary force of that cheap labor to tame inflation in the US, which would be much higher if we weren't bringing that cheap labor in. And so the employers love it because it creates more competition in the labor market. So the European American population has to take lower wages, right? So there's, of course, immigration is a giant complex debate. And that's a rabbit hole we could go down for 3 or 4 hours. But you're right. If you look at Japan, like I just got back from Japan about 3 weeks ago, my second trip there, and only 3% of the people living in Japan are foreign born versus the US. That's a huge number. And I don't know what the number is. But yes, they are very closed, very insular societies. So that does postpone the problem for the westernized countries. And one would argue that that's the reason they have such lax immigration policies too, is to simply increase their birth rate and prop up their economy. But think about it. In 70 years, countries like Japan, Russia, and what we think of as Western Europe now will literally not exist. I just wonder how that ends. There's a few, I can sort of picture this in my mind. There's like a small number of elders in Japan sitting around a conference table as their country is just being taken over by another country because they have no people to defend it. It's kind of a scary thought. I mean, this has never happened before in history where countries have just disappeared due to no birth rate. It's a new thing. Yeah,
it is. It's a completely new phenomenon.
Yeah.
I have heard the argument one time, though, that it might actually be cyclical. One of the main reasons people argued that the birth rates in these countries are so low at the moment is because of housing unaffordability.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think most things in the economy are quite fairly priced. But when I'm looking at countries like Canada and Britain, to some degree America as well, the housing situation is just abysmal.
Yeah.
Like, you can afford a lot of luxuries in life, but even if you're a minimum wage or close to minimum wage worker, but when it comes to housing, that's just the big kick in the teeth, which is kind of stifling any sort of future prosperity. And if you can't afford housing, then and you're a young person, how are you even going to anticipate having kids? However, the reason why some people argue that it's cyclical is because once the population starts to decline, well, obviously this is disregarding the point we mentioned earlier about immigration, but say in a country like South Korea, which is inevitably going to have a big population drop, and they're not being supplemented by immigration. When that happens, the demand for housing will absolutely plummet. Meaning, in theory, according to the laws of supply and demand, the prices of housing will also plummet alongside it. Yeah. And given that, would you anticipate that the birth rate will then shoot straight back up because now people can live in houses with 3, 4, 5 spare rooms?
Well, that takes a long time to play out, but it is possible. But before that happens, there will be a transfer of wealth through inheritance. The baby boomers, which are really a phenomenon in most of the world, not just in the US, they will transfer their wealth to their children. And then those kids will get a house and they'll, or be able to afford another house, right? So you do have that wealth transfer coming in, and that's going to be a pretty big tidal wave because in the US, the baby boomers are the second largest generation in history, depending on what demographer, the opinions vary a little bit, but it's about 76 million people, 76 million Americans versus 80 million millennials. So they reproduce themselves because the millennials are their echo generation. And so that wealth in 15 years will transfer to those millennial children. And
that will happen,
yeah,
but that will come far too late, way too late, because life expectancy in most Western countries, I believe, is 80 years old. For obviously some countries it's a tiny bit higher, like Japan. For some countries a little bit lower, like the US, which has higher rates of obesity and such, which lowers the life expectancy slightly. But then if we say as an average, people are having kids at 30 years old, then that means that when the baby boomers die at 80, the kids are going to get that wealth when they're 50, correct? And when the 50-year-olds get all of this wealth, and at that point, yes, brilliant, they're laughing. They might be able to live in a massive house, but they won't be able to have the kids because that ship has sailed.
It's the youngest boomers or the youngest millennials. I mean, not the oldest ones. So if the youngest millennial is 25, they'll be 40. So they could pull it off, right? Especially for the males, that won't be a problem. But if the male millennial who's 40, the tail end millennial, 40 at the time of inheritance, marries a Gen Z female, right? That's no problem, right? And the Gen Z generation is pretty big too. So I'm just pointing out that the wealth transfer.
Yeah, that is a possibility.
Is one issue. But the way to solve the housing problem is very simple. You have to increase supply of housing. I mean, all of these other things are just nibbling around the edges and they don't solve the problem. You have to increase the supply. And the only way you're going to increase supply of housing is for government to ease up on zoning restrictions and building codes, and they just have to make it easier to build houses and cheaper. And that's the only way it's going to be fixed.
I 100% agree, but unfortunately it's never going to happen. Well, at least in my eyes, it isn't, because the population pyramids are already becoming inverted.
I know.
There's more older people alive than younger people, and older people have the highest house ownership rates, and they are also way more likely to vote than younger people. Younger people aren't really interested in, voting. Their rates are lower. So when you factor these two things into the equation, like, have you ever heard of the phrase that the tyranny of democracy is the fact that you have two wolves and a lamb voting on what to eat for dinner? And I think that's what's going on with the housing market. Yeah. So you got the old people who are the property owners, who are, happy sitting on their pile of wealth. They want to keep the supply of housing as low as possible.
Of course.
Because otherwise, if they flood the market with supply, then the value of their houses will go down substantially.
And they do that, by the way. That's so interesting you say that, but we've got to get on to your other content here. But one more comment on that. I interviewed the author Thomas Sowell on the show before. He's written a whole bunch of great books. During that interview years ago, we were talking about how people prop up real estate prices through environmentalism. And so I coined a new phrase on that show, environmental racism. They dedicate permanent open spaces in their neighborhoods so nobody can build anything. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. I know you want to get onto the other content that you just mentioned. So what I find most interesting about the birth rates in all of these countries, well, first of all, they're all below 2.1, which is the minimum that you need to naturally, meet the replacement rate of sustaining a population. But ideally, if you want to grow, you need 2.5 or 3 or higher. But all of these countries have below. But what's most interesting is that when you look at the number of children that women and men say that they want, they typically tend to say somewhere between 2 and 3.
Right.
So at the last 40 years, it's been hovering around 2.5. So I've always found that interesting that you have this disparity between how many children men and women say they want, but then how many actually end up being born. What do you think that is?
And is that because they're starting too late?
I would argue it's definitely part of that. Yeah. So I think if we move over to the next slide, the average age for men and women has shot up dramatically in the last 60, 70 years. So in the 1960s, women were pretty much getting married as soon as they left high school. They'd get married at 20 years old.
Here they're 20 years old getting married in the 60s. And what happened? Two things in the 60s. The pill And the feminist movement, the second wave of the feminist movement happened. Those were the two major shifts for women that changed their thinking dramatically, right? So then you just instantly see this age of motherhood just skyrocket. It's amazing how that correlates.
Yeah, like absolutely. And you know, when a woman was initially getting married at 20 years old, she's going to pretty much start having babies and getting pregnant straight away, which is why the birth rates were so high at that point. But then fast forward, you know, to 2020 and beyond, when women are still saying that they want somewhere between 2 and 3 kids, that's not what actually ends up happening because they run out of time, to put it simply. So the birth rate ends up being a lot lower than what they state is the ideal for what they want.
That's amazing. It's really a disconnect. So in the early 60s, that birth rate was 3.6 per woman, approximately, looking at your chart. And now it's 1.73. Now, these are US stats, but as we know, like in South Korea, it's like 0.7. It's unbelievable how low Japan, South Korea. South Korea is now the lowest in the world, the lowest birth rates in the world.
Can't be 0.7. I think it's like 1.2 or something. There's no way it could be.
I just read an article, don't quote me exactly, it might be 0.73 or something, but it was the lowest birth rate and it broke its own record now. It's so low. The population is just collapsing in South Korea.
I might actually have the graph.
No more K-pop, folks.
This is the population pyramid of South Korea. Yeah, I remember I actually brought this up because I know that theirs is the most disastrous out of any of the other countries that I've seen. And you look at this, you can see the trajectory. Like if that's not scaring their government, I don't know what would. Because if you just say pick one point on the graph, the most populous age group is 50 years old, and if you compare this line here to the length of this line here, there's 3 times as many 50-year-olds than there is 0-year-old children.
Wow,
that should be the other way around.
Yeah, it should be because that puts a huge burden on the system. Okay, I found the article. It is now 0.73 in South Korea. Wow. 0.78 children over their lifetime. From 2022 shows Korean women bear an average of 0.78 children over their lifetime, down from 0.81 the prior year. So it was already very low.
Wow.
And of course, 2.1 is required to keep the population level or flat, excluding.
What's the solution to this?
Yeah.
Is it immigration, or is it giving money to pick women to have children? What is it?
The solution is you have to make the environment favorable. You know, the more people live in cities, the fewer children they have. So if they live in suburban or rural areas, they just naturally have more kids. But in a little condo in the city, you're just not going to have kids. And that's what the UN and the World Economic Forum want to push people into. They want to push people into living in little condos. You know, they're just not going to have kids if they live in those environments.
What's your opinion on suburbanism versus urbanism? Because I've actually been binging quite a lot of YouTubers recently who are arguing in favor of urbanist living spaces, but I haven't really seen many channels favoring the other way around. So maybe you could provide an insight into that.
Yeah, living in an urban environment, you're just not going to be wanting to have kids. But there's a bigger cultural issue just in the kind of the zeitgeist of the culture, the mentality of women especially. I mean, look, the reason you have to talk about women is they are the gateway to fertility. Men are the chasers, women are the choosers. It's pretty much always been that way throughout history. And when you look at the way life evolves for a modern woman, it's just very different than it has been for thousands and thousands of years, where she will be told basically being a mom, that's what losers do, right? Focus on your career, be free, be empowered, go out and party, have a lot of sexual exploration. What does that do to the mentality of females when they come into the marketplace for dating and mating? Tell us about that.
Oh, it's a complete shot in the foot. If they have that mindset, they are shooting themselves in the foot. And a lot of the time, they only realize that when it's too late. There's so many women, and they're free to do whatever they like. It's their life. But they spend their 20s, mainly getting themselves educated because they think that's going to bring them happiness. That's what their teachers have told them. That's what, society has pressured them into doing throughout their life. However, once they reach 30, if they're lucky, they would have 1 or 2 children. And that's, what the data kind of points towards is what's happening. But then some of them miss the boat completely. Just because, let's say that they're 30 years old, they date a few of the wrong guys, a few years passes, all of a sudden the ship sailed and they don't have any kids. And then this is why a lot of women who are in their 40s and 50s who did miss the boat and didn't have a chance to have children, they certainly might have a lot of money because, they got high paying jobs and they don't have any liabilities through children. But these are some of the most unhappy people around nowadays because they miss out on one of the biggest life experiences of raising and having children.
I agree with you. And it's this narrative that is being sold to women. It sounds good, right? Like you don't want to be dependent. You want to be free. You want to have choices. You want to be economically powerful. I get it. I understand that. I grew up with a single mother who was hitting her head against the glass ceiling, right? I understand what that mentality is. I totally get it. But the problem is, by the time they really realize what's happened, the ship has sailed on the idea of family formation. And think about it. If you're the corporation, you want to keep these women working. You want to keep them in their cubicle doing spreadsheets because that's how they're making you money. If you're Google or Apple or Facebook or any of these other, especially big, disgusting tech companies, that's another discussion. But any company, right? You don't want to pay for maternity leave, childcare, time off of work. And when a woman is told focus on education, she's thinking, well, I got to weigh this. I spent so much money and so much effort and so much time getting my bachelor's degree, then getting my master's degree. Why am I going to throw that 6 or 7 years of college away to go, settle down after only 3 years in the workforce, right? By that time, you're 28, right? Or 27. I understand how that's a dilemma for them. But this is like a false choice that the mainstream media has painted for everybody.
Yeah, and that's not even mentioning the student loan burden as well. Like a lot of them find themselves in between a rock and a hard place because it's either have children, focus on raising a family and stay broke and, get pummeled by your student loans, or it's forego children and, make the riches from working for one of these big corporations. Right. That's the dilemma that a lot of these women are facing.
So here's the interesting dilemma, right? The feminist movement grew out of women complaining that men, they were like subservient to men. But now, at least then, hopefully they were, if they were subservient to whatever extent that was true, right? At least it was with someone who loved them and cared for them and had a stake in their lives, especially if they had a family together. Of course, even if they don't like each other, the spouses are going to work together to raise their kids, right? But now you're just subservient to a corporation that doesn't care about you, that'll lay you off and give you a pink slip at a moment's notice. They don't care anything about you. And
that's probably owned by a male as well. Like the vast majority of the CEOs of the S&P 500 companies are run by men.
Yeah, of course. So let's examine that mentality of women a little bit more, okay? So all through school, this narrative is being painted. A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, as Gloria Steinem said, the sort of founder of the feminist movement. And then you come into the decade of the 20s, right? So they're in college for the early 20s, maybe into a master's degree. So 24, 25 years old before school is finished now, possibly. And then what's happening? So in school, there's a lot of sexual exploration, right? There's a lot of trying things, right? Figure out what you like, right? That's the sort of the narrative. And a lot of different dating and so forth. And then what happens? Get into the workforce. Okay, now I've got some money. got some economic power. I can go on trips, go experience a lot of life, even though, I'm working 68 hours a week, right? What happens to her psychology?
I haven't actually thought about that too much, but it sounds like, you've thought about this question, so maybe you could be able to provide a greater insight.
Well, kind of what I wanted to get to is this idea of why exploration like this matters and what it does. What does partner count? What does having all these experiences do? Is that a recipe for a good family life in the future? Or is it a recipe for sabotaging that? And you have some charts on this, I think, right?
Yeah. The chart here, it shows that the risk of divorce for women increases substantially from somewhere between 5 and 10% when a woman's had no partners before marriage to upwards of potentially 30%. In fact, the most up-to-date statistics show it is over 30% for when a woman's had a higher number of partners. And, that's a 6x difference compared to when a woman's had no partners. Like it increases the chance that a woman's going to get divorced dramatically if she's had all of these partners, most likely in school.
So from 0 partners prior to marriage to 10 plus partners, I mean, what is the partner count for people? If they get married at 30, okay, so we talked about the age of marriage earlier. If they get married at 30 and maybe they start at 18, there's probably going to be 12 partners in there, 1 a year, maybe, right? I don't know. Maybe it's a lot more.
Yeah.
I've certainly seen a lot more. But that will increase the chance of an unsuccessful marriage by what number? Just say that again, by 30%, huh?
Seems to be, yeah. If we do the quick maths on that, look, about 33%, I believe, if my eyesight's correct.
Right.
The most up-to-date statistics from 6%. So that's almost a 30% increase. 6-fold increase.
And why is it? Because in her mind, she's making comparisons to prior partners?
Yeah, I would say it's mostly because of that.
Or does it become kind of this expectation for more novelty, right? That's one of the things that especially males have with their kind of mating strategy, right? Is more novelty is something they seek out, right? Because they seek to spread their genes to as many women as possible. Versus women, do they have that novelty bug the way men do?
Well, feminism is trying to instill that value in women, that they're no different to men sexually, and they can have that novelty like sort of thing going on, which is why a lot of these women are sleeping with several different guys in their 20s. But I also think there's a couple other things going on of why this data is so staggering. I think it gives women the sense of replaceability for men, that when a woman's had so many sexual partners, she doesn't just have one guy in her life. She's thinking about, she realizes how easy it is to replace the guys, because she knows that another guy is going to be wanting to be sleeping with her around the corner. Another point of what it does is it shreds their pair bonding abilities. So when a woman has sex with a guy, oxytocin is released, and she feels some form of attachment. And obviously, if she does that with 10 plus different guys, then the chance that she's going to be pair bonded to any of them is going to decrease. But if she was just with one guy, then she has a lot more, a much higher, greater sense of attachment to him.
So that's interesting. I mean, men feel that too, though. Men feel a pair bonding a sensation. Men have oxytocin, but just to a much lower degree than women do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's where the disparity kind of arises. That obviously men would have this pair bonding thing as well, but to not the same extent as women do.
Right. I mean, women are literally flooded with oxytocin. It's a completely different set of chemistry. So it's a very different reaction. I think there's one more component when you just look at the heart, right? Is that because of that genetic nature of each sex, when it doesn't work out at some level for the female, even if, she was fed a narrative of this, that, and the other thing. At some level, I believe she feels this didn't work out, and there's some level of disappointment. And I think what that causes in her is for her to build a wall around her heart, if you will. And I know a lot of, the heart is like a metaphor, right? But there's a lot of science that the heart is actually like the brain. I mean, we've certainly thought that for, eons, right? That thinking's been around, but science is actually now proving it, that is a real influence on your thinking, that I have a broken heart, right? There's something very real to that science is developing. So as that wall goes up, it increases distrust in her because she has had so many prior disappointments, so many prior relationships that did not work at some level. So that's going to make her less open to a deep relationship with the right guy. Ostensibly, if she finds the right guy, it's less likely to work. I think that's a component.
Yeah, there's that. And additionally, it's a lot easier for a woman to have sex with a guy who is very high value, very attractive, than it is for her to try and get a relationship with that guy. So when you think about it this way, a woman might, just to put numbers on it to make it simple, a woman might be able to have sex with a guy who's 8 out of 10, even though she might only be a 5 herself. However, the guy that she will eventually go on to marry will most likely be that 5 out of 10 guy. And it creates this comparison mindset, because if a woman has previously had several sexual experiences with this, guy who's really attractive, then when she eventually settles down with the 5 out of 10 guy, she's a little bit underwhelmed. Yeah, she's eventually she feels underwhelmed and she feels like she's settling.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And so a lot of people talk about, they call that really attractive guy a Chad, right? That's funny to
exactly. me. Or a Giga Chad.
Or a Giga Chad. Okay. So the other thing you didn't mention is that really attractive Chad guy has tons of options, because he's got the body, he's got the money, he's got the game. And so he isn't willing to settle down, or isn't very interested in that, because he keeps getting psychological reinforcement of, hey, there's all these opportunities, all these women coming at me. So on the times that lower value woman, because of her hypergamy, gets to jump up to that level, it's not going to work because he's not going to keep her around. Then she ends up, and also there's that alpha and beta concept as well, right? So the alpha guy is like the alpha dog, right? He's the head, he's the top pick. But women don't usually end up with that guy. They end up with more of a beta guy who's a good provider and who's more stable and steady, but a lot less exciting, right? So what about that dynamic?
Yeah, well, men know it themselves, that if they were handed on a plate several really attractive women, the chance that they're going to be settling down with one of them is very, very slim, because it feeds into their evolutionary strategy. Men want to spread their seed as far as possible, but then right. A lot of the women are deceived because they think, if they are able to have sex with this really attractive guy, then it must show that they're on his level. But right. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and the man is just
he's just having fun.
Having fun.
Yeah, right.
I'm trying to think of a euphemism right. to.
Well, he's having a roll in the hay. I mean, that's what it is.
Exactly.
So what happens though is all of those women who had that experience with Chad, the alpha guy, they can't get a guy like that to commit to them. And the guys can play that game for decades longer than women can. So there's no urgency for the men, yet the women have the clock and the urgency. Okay. So that equation is very imbalanced, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It really is tilting it. And I believe that dating is a zero-sum game. So if there's one guy at the top who's, basically monopolizing on all of the women beneath him, then the guys who get left out are the average guys and the below average guys, because the options are already gone, because they're with the men at the very top. And that's not how it used to be, say, 50, 60, 70 years ago, when monogamy was the predominant system for how men and women would couple, which obviously would lead to a one-to-one formation. Right. And assuming that there's equal numbers of men and women in a population, which for the most part there is, apart from the actual specific numbers say that there are slightly more men than there are women, but for the most part it is a one-to-one system.
Right. That's amazing that nature does that. I don't, talk about something that can't be explained. That's truly amazing.
What, more men than women, you're saying?
Yeah. Right.
Oh,
well, just by a slight margin. Simple, I mean, it's almost.
Yeah, I think there is quite a simple explanation for it. I could provide it quickly if that's all right.
Sure.
Basically, it comes down to men are far more ignorant and bigger risk takers than women, to put it in simple terms. So, because men are more likely to take risks, and when you look at men and women's roles, what they would have been 10,000 years ago, men would have been climbing up trees, doing the most dangerous and difficult jobs. So they would have been on hunts.
Die more.
Yeah, so there's a lot higher chance that they would die. Meanwhile, for women, their main jobs would just be looking after children and gathering berries, the crops that have already been planted. Yeah, far less dangerous. So come reproduction age, say 18 years old and upwards, the numbers will eventually even out. There's going to be equal number of men and women. Oh, one more point that I just forgot to mention.
But what I'm saying is amazing about that is that God or intelligent design makes that almost equal number be born. Like, that's incredible.
Oh, yeah.
How does that happen?
Exactly, yeah. Like, come reproduction age. Right. And there's also one other massive factor is that men were far more likely to be cut in numbers during battles with other tribes, or when societies grew with other societies. Women don't really fight in wars. They've never really fought in wars, not anywhere near to the same degree as men. So that's another element.
Of course. I want to switch to another concept that's important in this discussion, and that is social media. The role of social media is not to be underestimated. And you did a video on this that was very interesting. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the biggest dating app and site in the world is Instagram. It is not a dating site. It is a social media site. So what's interesting about this is that women always keep their options open, because if you're in a relationship, there's no reason you shouldn't be on social media, right? You're not on Tinder, right? But you're on social media, Instagram. So it runs under the guise of social media, but it's really not, as we all know. And it's got over 1 billion people now. So because of the way the dynamics work, because men have to do the chasing and the approaching the vast majority of the time, women can just put pictures up, and men are the more visual creatures. Well, I don't know, you kind of disagree with that, I think, but it's another point. The men will just chase and like and constantly feed the egos of the women on social media, and of course on dating sites, but we're not even talking about dating sites per se. We're just talking about Instagram. And so that changes the psychology of the woman if she's out of a relationship and when she gets in a relationship, because she's still getting all this positive feedback inside of a relationship. And she has to be saying that, I put a picture up in a bikini and all these guys are liking my post and commenting, telling me how beautiful I am. And my boyfriend doesn't say that. He doesn't appreciate me, she'll think, right? And if he does appreciate her too much, well, then he doesn't have an edge, so she won't be attracted to him anyway. So you cannot win this game. What do you think?
Yeah, like it is a very slippery slope, for men and women who are in relationships, and the woman's big on Instagram. And I've even seen a lot of women say that as soon as they uploaded a photo of them with their boyfriend, who had never been seen before on Instagram, they would immediately lose 100 followers, or the post would get significantly less likes than their other ones, which was just them. So it kind of, causes women to be putting this in this tough position. They're almost walking the tightrope. They've either got to think, I have as much validation and attention from guys as possible on Instagram, or I care about my boyfriend and I want him to be shown on my Instagram as in the public profile.
And I will tell you, I know many, many women who are in serious relationships and you never see their boyfriend on social media. It's just them. It's either a girl's adventure out or it's just them alone. I mean, it's just weird. This massively narcissistic culture. Literally, if someone looked at today from even 20 years ago, they would think this is psychotic, the way people are acting now. I mean, it is just weird. Imagine having from 20 years ago, from 2003, imagine having a website where you're going to put all these provocative pictures and you're going to sit there for hours taking 300 angles and shots and then spend hours modifying them on photo editing programs. It's like a sick level of narcissism. I just can't believe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then going one step further, it's made even worse that women know themselves that the more provocative and sexually arousing photos they post, the more attention, followers, likes they get. This is very, very easy to prove. If anyone just wants to see themselves just how powerful this metric is, I would ask you to go to any Instagram model's profile and then just look at the difference in terms of likes on a post based on whether the woman is wearing a, say, bikini, she's showing a lot of skin, versus if she's doing a very modest, very conservative pose and, she's grabbing dinner with her friends or something. The difference in likes is massive.
Yeah. Oh, no question about it. And there are lots of women on Instagram with lingerie and all sorts of it gets very provocative. And this is just social media, folks. It's not a dating site. It's not a hooker site, right? It's just social media. It's supposed to be like this innocent thing. Here's another interesting component, and I know we got to wrap it up here in a moment, but it's been said that due to the Great Society and the welfare state and all these social programs, some have made the comment that the government is the new husband because it has made it so women do not need men anymore to be a provider because the government will be the provider. I have a corollary to that. So if government is the new husband, I would say that Instagram is the new boyfriend. And here's what I mean when I say that. It's the sort of the virtual version of bringing women flowers, chasing them, being a suitor, right? You have all of these men who are just constantly liking and commenting on all of these women that they have never met and will never meet. And that is just really causing a real shift in the minds of the women receiving all this attention, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And when you think about how the barriers to entry are so much lower, it's not difficult to upload photos that are provocatively taken on Instagram, but it is hard to maintain a relationship, date guys, filter through the bad ones, find a guy who's actually serious, get him to commit to you, and yada, yada, yada. There's that. But then even when you look at the male side, you see almost an equivalent thing going on. You see men forming relationships with pseudo girlfriends, virtual girlfriends online through sites like OnlyFans.
Yeah, OnlyFans is absolutely
hilarious.
Disgusting. It's unbelievable.
The hilarious thing is, though, that these men, little do they know that the woman who's beautiful, 20 years old, that they're paying money for and messaging, having all of these like hilarious conversations with, is most likely just some 300-pound guy in some foreign country that they've never met before and is just typing all of these messages. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because Andrew Tate literally admitted that. He said that when he had his business, his web business, that he would type for the girls. It wasn't even them talking. He would just do it, right? A lot of times. And now you can just use Chat GPT, right? In fact, people are doing that on dating sites. They are using these AI applications to have conversations. I mean, everything has become a derivative of reality. Is there any reality left? I mean, you know, these women look nothing like their pictures. The photo editing programs modify everything, face, lighting, body, you know, everything, right? And so that's not the real person. It's a proxy for the person. It's an avatar. And then even the words aren't the person. It's all Cyrano de Bergerac. Where does this end? How does society?
It's getting even worse.
This?
It's only getting worse, because when you look at deepfakes, I think this is probably the most concerning thing of the future. The possibilities are endless, and they are so real nowadays.
Yeah,
it's such a blurred line, and the dangers of this, the biggest danger, I think, is if some video pops up, say, which supposedly shows Vladimir Putin or, you know, one of the other biggest world leaders making remarks, you know, which would be deemed as a threat.
Someone might launch a missile.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, right. There's huge stakes at play here.
Oh yeah, it's huge, and I think courts of law, as I've long said, if you have a video of someone robbing a bank, how can that even be evidence anymore? It can be faked so easily. I mean, anybody can make a deep fake now of anybody talking and saying whatever you want. It's incredibly scary.
Yeah, they need to increase the punishments for being caught using deep fakes to very high levels. It is impersonation.
Right. But the problem is those punishments would only apply likely to people in, you know, westernized countries or Asian countries. But if you have some hacker in his basement in Nigeria, you know, how are you going to, you know, it's anybody can do it.
It's an incredibly difficult thing to control.
In the past, you know, if you wanted to destroy the world, you needed an army. Today, one person has so much power through misinformation, deep fakes, all of these tools we all have. So it's a scary time for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, your content is fantastic. You've really got a lot of very interesting insights into an important concept, because if people don't get together, form relationships, and form families, it's game over. I mean, society is ending before our eyes.
Exactly.
And you can chart exactly where we will be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You know exactly where we'll be, because the numbers are the numbers and they cannot be changed. So just any final thoughts you want to wrap up with, and of course, tell people where they can find you and, you know, anything else you want to say.
Well, I was going to add one more thing to that, as in, you know, most, as I previously stated, most Western countries are putting the bandage over the wound at the moment just by allowing immigration to prop up for the inevitable population decline. But that is only ever going to be a short-term fix, because once all of these other poorer countries develop, their birth rates will plummet, and then they won't have any people that our countries can import over to keep our populations in check. It's going to be a global issue. And, you know, the leaders of the world are really going to have to think of something smart of how they're going to correct that. That's all I had to add on that point. But anyway, it's been really good chatting to you. I am Wheat Waffles, found on YouTube for anyone who's interested. That's the main platform that I show myself on. And if you found what I've had to say interesting, feel free to check out my content.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Wheat Waffles, thanks so much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.